what's the use of two strong legs if you only run away? And what use is the finest voice when you have nothing good to say? What good is strength and muscle if you only push and shove? And what's the use of two good ears when you can't hear those you love? It's not just what you're born with, it's what you choose to bear. And it's not how big your share is, but how much you can share. And it's not the fights you dreamed of, but those you really fought. It's not what you've been given, it's what you do with what you've got. Yeah, it's not just what you're born with, it's what you choose to bear. And it's not how big your share is, but how much you can share. And it's not the fights you dreamed of, but those you really fought. It's not what you've been given, it's what you do with what you've got.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Seeds of Revolution. I'm very excited today to talk to a new friend, Kevin Neish. Kevin is an activist and an internationalist. He sent me his bio. It is too incredible to summarize, certainly with a poor summary that I would give. So I'll let him talk about his life's work. Kevin has done incredible things with Gaza, with Ferry Creek, with all sorts of international solidarity and labor movements. And we asked Kevin to come on today just to talk to us about that and tell us some war stories. So, Kevin, thank you so much for appearing on Seeds of Revolution. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Hopefully we can get into some just educational whatever. We can just talk about what people can do and how they can do it instead of my history and whatnot. And but anyways, yeah. So me.
So you grew up in a political family.
Yeah, my dad was a hardline Communist Party member, Maoist, Stalinist, and he helped form the Fishermen's Union on the coast here. It was
on Vancouver Island.
Well, in BC. In BC, and
was he a fisherman?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, his family. That's the background is all fishermen. They came. I think his father came over from Scotland, and they actually squatted on Dead Man's Island. It's now a military base in off of Stanley Park, but back in the 30s it was a squatters. So they lived in a float house on the beach around Dead Man. Well, then it was called Dead Man's Island, but yeah. So that he only went to sixth grade, but he did a lot with his life just with a sixth grade education. School of Hard Knocks. And then Mom, she was a feminist, Marxist, communist. Hated the Communist Party because of its patriarchy, and there were some real dandy discussions at the kitchen table sometimes.
I was going to say, how does that play out between your mom and your dad? If he's a stalwart party member and she's not.
Well, I mean, she didn't. I shouldn't say she hated the party, but there was lots of good people in the party that she enjoyed them. But there was the patriarchy, the male dominance, and the lack of a feminist perspective. That's what drove her crazy. So and her background, it was Finnish. So her grandparents were the founders of a Finnish communal society called Saintula up the coast here. It was left wing. I'd say it was communist, but certainly socialist. Back in 1895, I guess, when he started. So yeah, anyways, a lot of left wing. I mean, you couldn't help but absorb it. Nobody spent any time brainwashing me when I was a kid. It was simply there.
I was going to ask you about that. So what was your political education? Did your parents sit you down and say, these are the books we want you to read, these are the thinkers we want you to study?
No. It was, I actually harken back to that today sometimes, that there wasn't any, I can't think of the word, but brainwashing, whatever. I simply learned from being around them. Remember as a kid, the janitors went on strike in the schools. And so all the schools shut down, and they kept, I think S.J. Willis, they kept one school open for exams. and the janitors, of course, were picketing it. And Dad, being a trade union leader, he went down to picket and took me along with him. And I'm walking along the picket line as a little kid with Dad. I'm thinking, I thought, what's going on here? I was just a little kid. Well, not a little kid, but I was, junior high, I guess. And I said, what? And here my friends are walking by me, looking at me. What's the matter with this guy? What's he doing here? I thought, well, the janitors are on strike. My dad's not a janitor. He's on the picket line with them. What? Why? Why? And it just got set bells off. And Mom.
Did you ask your dad why?
No. I just took it all in, and eventually I figured it out, obviously. But and then Mom, I was a little tiny kid. I don't remember how old I was. I probably 5 or something, and she was a leader in the anti-nuclear movement, and she was one of the founders, I think, of the Victoria Peace Council. And they would hold silent vigils, and down at the Hudson Bay store on Douglas, and they'd all, these women, mainly women, but they line up and just stand there with signs on the public property in front of the store. And I'm standing with Mom, and a guy walked up and spat on my mom's shoes. And I, as a little kid, I thought, what? Why? Why did this man do that? And it just, of course, as a little kid, I would think about that for a long time and and then I just sort of picked things out as to why, and all the pieces fell into place. But that's the background, and that's where it started. And there was, literature everywhere. I could just pick it up,
What kind of literature?
Anti-Vietnam War magazines. Mom and Dad went to Cuba in 1961 as part of a trade union delegation from the Fishermen's Union, Mom and Dad. And so they subscribed to Tricontinental. There was Bohemia, a Cuban magazine, and Dad would, he had subscription for the Sandinista magazine way back before anybody even knew about the Sandinistas. It was the, I can't think of the name of it, but the magazine was, or the newspaper was always laying around the kitchen table, and I'd just, pick it up and have a read and connect the dots.
What was your, moment, if you had one, of a political awakening? When did you decide to pursue an activist, social justice life?
Oh my gosh. I couldn't even say. So certainly, Mom and Dad, well, mainly Mom. Mom took us to Cuba in 1966. And I'd say that was the touchstone, going to Cuba and just seeing what was happening there in 1966. It was early days in the revolution, but
I was going to say, what was that like post-revolution? Only 5 years into the revolution.
Yeah, no, it was 7 years.
7 years.
7 years. Yeah. Anyways, it was. I won't say it was an eye opener. It's just little seeds were planted. As a kid, I remember going down the highway, and I'm used to back then there was billboards all over Canada. It was still legal to have billboards anywhere, and highways were full of these, propaganda, media, Coca-Cola and blah, blah, blah in Canada. Well, I'm going down the highway in Cuba, and there's one of the billboards, and it's got a picture of a guy in a chair with dots, and it's obvious he's going into a wire garbage basket. And that's all there was. Just a young fellow in a chair going into the garbage basket. And I guess there was some Spanish there, but even the fact it was visual, I found out later on. And I didn't know Spanish, but I understood what it meant. But without an education, you're garbage. And I was no different than an illiterate Cuban that would be going down the road and see the billboard from the government, and the government's telling me, without an education, you're garbage. And I remember that as a kid. Wow, geez, a billboard like that here. Why don't I see billboards like that in Canada?
Did you take that to heart and pursue your own educational goals?
I was a horrendous student. I ended up going into mechanics, I'm a heavy duty mechanic, automotive mechanic. I got 4 different mechanics tickets, commercial transport.
And that's how you made your living as a mechanic?
Yep. I'm a marine engineer, and well, again, the impact of parents. I'm just graduated. I'm sitting at the kitchen table thinking, wow, I'm done. School's finished. Oh God, he lost summer.
So you graduated high school?
Yeah, graduated. This is, June. Away we go. And Mom just walks up and plugs down an open, Comusum College, what do you call it? It just, all the courses. She plunks it down in front of me, opened up to the, the trade section. And she says, I think you should either go into auto body or diesel mechanics. I think auto body is a little more dangerous, she said, because of the danger of, contamination and breathing stuff. So I think you should go into heavy duty mechanics. And I was speechless. I just looked, wait a minute, I just got out of school. What's this all about? Because I could have gone to university because I had the grades, but I couldn't learn French to save my soul, just whatever it is. But in the end, mechanics, I'm just a real good mechanic. I'm good at troubleshooting. And actually, that's a quick point, since we're talking about teachable moments, and you bring up education. Without education, you're garbage, as the Cubans said. If somebody wants to help the revolution or whatever, the fight against imperialism, or you've got to be useful. I'm sorry to say, I've been a part of an awful lot of projects, with Sowetan, Ferry Creek, picket lines, even comics books here, helping out here and there, and overseas and whatnot. And unless you've got something to offer, you're simply you're a burden.
What do you mean by useful, or something to?
Well, I mean, whatever it is. I ended up being a mechanic, heavy duty mechanic. Well, I can, honestly, I can fix almost anything, with a pocket knife and a bit of wire, and everything from I was in Guatemala with a trade union leader. Anyways, a fellow. And he was, raging around his apartment. I was just there just to stop over and carry on to El Salvador. And he's raging around the apartment because his phone didn't work. And without a phone, political activist is absolutely helpless. Well, I had a pocket knife on me, and I, pulled the wires out of the wall and played around. I got his phone working. Well, I could have got his firstborn child. He was flabbergasted that somebody could, with a pocket knife fix his phone. So, and that's come up many times, whether it was on the, in Gaza, I arrived in Gaza, and they couldn't give me a key to the activist apartment in Gaza City because they'd been making copies of the keys, and the keys simply didn't work, so they couldn't give me a key for the apartment, which was sort of the central meeting place for the activists, the solidarity activists in Gaza, and they had all these keys laying on the table. And so I just scooped them all up, and I walked out to the front door and opened up my multi-tool, which had a file on it. And I sat there for about an hour before it even got introduced, and I played around with the keys, and I got almost all of them working. Because the Gaza key cutting machines are so worn out that they'd be just a little bit low. It was one or the other, and luckily they were, they didn't cut enough metal off, so I just simply filed away till I got them all working.
So what was your?
Anyways, that's just an example of my mechanics being useful, but you could be anything. Well, like yourself, I couldn't do a podcast, but you're able to pull that off. And
so, what would your advice be to younger activists and internationalists who hear what you say about being useful and want to be useful in their own way?
Well, whatever your passion is, as far as work, quote unquote, I'm making quote marks here. Learn learn what your passion is, or pick a trade that's of use to the movement, whatever it is, whether it's podcast or video or mechanicking or I mean, I've seen so many, again, people showing up and in Cuba, when I was there in 1990 on a solidarity brigade, and unfortunately our group was full of young, earnest, radical, kids, whatever, and the Cubans, you could see they'd seen this before. These young folks weren't of any use, I guess, in their eyes. They had to they all wanted to be like Che. Well, Che was a trained doctor. It came from a very well-educated family, and so he immediately had something to offer the revolution. And of course, it carried on from there, with handling guns and everything else. But he and like I say, I've just seen it so many times that folks show up, and I think they want to take the easy route, the quick route. Let's go to Cuba and help them. Well, they don't need help from somebody who doesn't have much to offer. I hate to be brutal on some of these things, but
when you've had these experiences, and you just touched on Gaza, El Salvador, Guatemala, Cuba. When you've been to these places, can you generalize what sorts of help people need the most that the activist internationalist community can provide?
Oh gosh, well, it's wow. Need the most. Well, this depends on the situation. Whether they need well, it just depends on the situation. When I went to Gaza,
What year did you go to Gaza?
I was 2013. I was there for 4 months. I got there and looked around, and I was there as an internationalist. Well, I mean, some places it's pretty simple. This job was simple. I went to Gaza, and the job was to stand around in a field with the Palestinian farmers as they worked, and I was in a reflective reflective jacket, so that the Israelis would see that that an internationalist was there, and they, if they shot, they'd likely shoot me, which would which would be a bother to them.
Hmm.
So the job was simple.
So you were a human shield.
I was a human shield, exactly. Similar in Guatemala, I was a human shield, and to some degree El Salvador. But yeah, that's a pretty simple gig. You just have to be a warm, breathing, white, have the right passport, and you just get between. And but you have to have some political smarts to understand that. You'd have to not example. I was in Bethlehem, 2002, just when the second Intifada was getting rolling, and we had it was about 50 of us from the International Solidarity Movement, and that's Rachel Corrie's organization. She actually died a year after me. I was almost exactly a year after I was there. I was in Bethlehem. She died in Gaza. But anyways, so we were there, and we were Israelis had started the invasion of the West Bank, and they were they wouldn't invade Bethlehem because it was Easter weekend. They must have had a deal with the Pope not to. Honestly, they waited until Tuesday morning at 1:05, and then they came in and blew everything up around our camp. But anyways, so we're there, and we marched into Betjela next door. I think it was Betjela, and all rah, these young folks, and they're all now we're like Che, rah, and we march into Betjela, and there's an armored personnel carrier there stopping us on this narrow stone street, and he's on the radio talking. Saw him with the phone to his ear talking. I guess he was getting approval, and then he opened fire. He didn't shoot into us. but he shot at the rock paving stones at her feet, and he shot at the rock walls around us. And I think one American woman got a ricocheted bullet in her belly, and a British fellow got nicked in the forehead. And it was a few injured folks, and we all retreated down the hill, and sort of mayhem. And the Palestinians, they knew what was coming. They had a whole row of ambulances behind us, so they weren't surprised. They were surprised. They said that was the first time that the Israelis had shot at internationalists, but they were prepared. They had the ambulances, and we loaded up our wounded and carried on back to the Bethlehem Star Hotel, because the Israelis still hadn't invaded Bethlehem yet. So we retreated, and we get up there, 50 of us or so. And I remember this one British fellow, won't say his name, he's some sort of a famous comedian. Anyways, he gets up and he starts yelling. He says, "We have to leave. We have to leave. They're shooting real bullets at us. We all have to get out. We have to leave. This isn't what we came for." So I got up right after him. I think two other people might have got up at the same line. We have to get out of here. And so I got up. So, well, didn't you do any studying? Didn't you do any reading before you came? This is exactly what we're here for. It's the other way around. We're being treated like the Palestinians now, and this is what we're here for. We have to stand with them. And luckily, it was just those 3 or 4 that broke. And it would have been fine if they had broke and then just left quietly. But I guess they wanted to shut the whole thing down to make themselves feel better. I don't know, but they wanted everybody, or maybe they were plants. They wanted everybody to leave, and they tried hard. But like I say, the 45 of us simply stayed. And the British embassy brought an armored, a bulletproof car in to pick him up, and the Americans brought an armored vehicle of some sort with a SWAT team, and they loaded up a couple of the young American activists that wanted to get out, and as they were doing this, we had a meeting as they were actually loading them up in front of the Bethlehem Star Hotel, and the Palestinians told us, "Okay, anybody who wants to go now, because we do not want these people here again." The British embassy, the U.S. embassy, they're not coming here again. So if you want to go, that's fine. We understand, but go now. Don't fold up on us later on and be crying. And so it was another teachable moment. Just like I said, the Palestinians, it was nothing to them.
What are your politics? I mean, you talked about your father being a staunch Maoist and Stalinist, and your mother being a Marxist. But after this lifetime of activism and adventure, what if somebody says, what political line do you follow? What's your answer?
Just the way you introduced me, I guess. I mean, internationalist. I'm a left wing, I guess. Probably socialist, communist, whatever. I mean, I'm not a hard line communist, but the international solidarity movements. That's an example of my politics. ISM, it's a Palestinian-led organization. So that was a group in the Bethlehem Star Hotel. That was them. It was led by the Palestinians. You took orders from the Palestinians. If you didn't agree with them, you were gone. You were, no hard feelings, but there's the door. Get out of here. If you're not going to listen to the people that brought you here. So it's the same thing. I try and take that same line of thinking wherever I am. It's in El Salvador, when I was an election observer. I was there as an FMLN. That's left wing, the guerrillas, and then it became a political party. and they wanted election observers. So, I volunteered to go down. I must have been 8 or 9 different elections. I went down and was an observer. But again, they called the shots. They put me through the training, and they said, you're going to be here, you're going to be there, and you just followed orders, and you had to trust them.
I'm particularly interested in your time in El Salvador because in 2000 I went to El Salvador to do research on the El Mozote massacre and actually interviewed some survivors and some former FMLN members. And so I'm particularly interested in how you navigated that terrain and what you came away with from your Salvadoran experience.
Because, go ahead.
For our listeners, the Salvadoran Revolution has really turned on itself, and Bukele has really managed to betray, at least in my opinion, the last vestiges of what that revolution was about. So I'm just curious to hear your take on that experience and Salvadoran politics.
Again, I'm a gringo. Far be it from me to tell them what to do. But
I'm not asking you to tell them. I'm asking you to tell me.
Yeah. Well, I think they got separated from the people. I think they got separated from the people. I don't know if it was somebody born from within, or if it was money, or an easier life, or whatever. But yeah, I think they just
like Ortega in Nicaragua, same sort of thing.
Yeah, I still trying to figure out what's going on in Nicaragua today. But like a trade union, I've been a trade union activist all my life, and I've had a number of times I've had people come up to me, and certainly not Canadian trade unionists. It's not radical socialist left wing stuff. It's just average Joes. Anyways, they come up to me and say, "Oh, this goddamn union, wow." I said, "Well, wait a minute. You're the union. What are you bitching about? I mean, you are the union. You got nothing to complain about. If you don't like it, you better change it." But in the case of the FMLN, I got the feeling that the FMLN used to be made up of people, the people, and I think it must have got separated, and they got.
That seems to happen throughout the history of left-wing activism, which is the base revolutionary organization after it takes power, or several years after it takes power, then loses power, seems to get corrupted and lose touch with its mass base. Curious as to why you think that is, because that pattern, whether it's the FMLN, in my opinion, whether it's Daniel Ortega, whether it's Fidel, just seems to be replicating over and over and over again.
Well, I mean, look who they're up against. It's, they're up against a monster with the Americans and their ability to simply print money. I remember a point. It's relevant. When I think it was when Saddam was defeated. So the Americans sent one of their huge transport planes, and I saw this on TV. They're unloading a pallet, like a pallet full. So you got a pallet 3.5 by 4 feet, whatever, square of packaged up $100 US bills. So they're here these suffering people have been sanctioned forever, and a lot, and somebody comes in with a pallet full, and that was just one pallet full of US $100 bills, all neatly packaged up and ready to hand out. It costs them nothing. They just it's the cost of the paper, and they come into a country like El Salvador and throw the money around, or wow, look what happened in Syria. I mean, look what they're pouring into Ukraine right now. I mean, the huge. I keep, why you think, why are these Ukrainians willing to, basically risk life and limb for Zelensky in the U.S.? Well, because the States is just pouring in, billions of dollars, and they're just throwing money around. It's going to backfire. I mean, it is backfiring. The States
Do you not see the Ukraine war as a war of self-defense?
No.
Can you tell us why?
Well, NATO had this plan of bringing nuclear weapons to the very border of then the Soviet Union, Russia, and there's a history in Ukraine of fascism. The states right up until 1990, the states was funding extreme right-wing, fascist, Nazi, whatever organizations in Ukraine. They were pouring money in to keep these groups going and to work behind the lines, so to speak. And it paid off in the end. I'm not saying there weren't screw ups in the socialist movement and communist, quote unquote, communist Russia or communist USSR and East Germany and whatnot, but the forces that were against them conspiring around the clock. But no, I think it's it's a horrendous mess. I mean, Christ, the death and destruction. But no, they're out to. Their goal is to destroy China in the end, but they wanted to wipe out and break up Russia, and it's. They say it themselves. You go online and just do the research. They were talking about this back in before 2014, before the maiden revolution, if you can call it that happened. That it was part of the game plan.
What effect has your politics and your activism had on your personal life and your family life? Has it made it more difficult to have a family?
Yeah, yeah, well, my late wife, Georgina, she came from real non-left-wing roots up in the Peace River country, but but good people, not left-wing, but just really good people, hardworking, farmers, loggers, and whatnot. That's her that's my late wife's family background, and the sort of salt of the earth kind of thing, and but not left-wing, Peace River country. They'd elect a monkey if it was conservative party. It wouldn't matter who was running his vote. But we fell in love and had a child, and she she just watched what I was doing and appreciated that I was helping people, doing the right thing, always doing the right thing, whether it was in unions or when I went to Guatemala in '89 as a human shield for a trade union leader out of Vancouver. I sat down with Georgina and my daughter Jennifer and said, well, here's what I'm doing. So it'll be dangerous. Is that okay with you folks? And, they agreed that it was, after they'd seen enough and knew enough that it was worth the risk. And in the end, it paid off. I went down and there was a car bomb attack on the activists I was with, and I was the only human shield they had. There was 5 of them. Rigobert Menchu was one of them, and Frank LaRue and a couple of retired university professors in exile, and they'd all come back to Guatemala to have peace talks with the government, and the military didn't agree. And so we had a car bomb outside our building. Didn't go off, but then we got chased through the streets by a death squad. Exciting. And anyways, yeah. So I just, and at one point as well, I before that I sat down with Georgina and just basically just warned her that when it came to certain things, family would come second. whatever it is. If someone's life is in danger, well, the comfort of my family would come second to.
How did she respond to that?
Oh, she accepted it. No, it was.
How did your daughter respond to that?
Oh, she knew enough about it, but she well, just like me, she'll learn on her own, and well, we went to Cuba together in 1990 as part of a Solidarity Internationalist Brigade, and so she I'm hoping just like me, sort of plant the seeds that I saw in '66. Well, she would have seen similar things in 1990, and it took many years for me to connect the dots. But it was always a touchstone, that trip to Cuba in '66. It was any left wing thing would happen, I'd be impossible not to. I'd refer back to sort of like what would the Cubans do? What were the Cubans doing then? The Cubans were. I remember going to a school in Cuba, and here the revolution happened not long before. Here they had a whole school where they were paying people to make art. And as a kid, I was even as a little kid, I look at that and think, wow, they're paying people to make art. We're in Canada. I mean, I enjoyed making art as a kid, but they're paying people here to make art, whereas in Canada, artists starve.
Has your daughter grown up to be a political person?
I'd like to think so. She's got a good heart. She's I remember I got a call from her. She had got a job in Fort McMurray. Her and her husband, to get work. They had to. They went all the way up to Fort McMurray. I got a call from her. All of a sudden, she'd getting their feet settled in, and she took a job in a grocery store. I don't know, whatever it was, some major chain. And she got a hold of me, and it was the store was full of guest workers from the Philippines. And she got a hold of me, and she says, Dad, they treat these people like garbage. They yell and scream and abuse them. They, I don't know what to do. She was treated well because she was white. It was a microcosm of being overseas. She had the right passport and the right skin color, and she said, "Well, God." And these guest workers were helpless, because if they stood up to them, they'd be simply sent back to the Philippines. And anybody who stood their ground a bit, she said they'll haul them up into the office, and I could hear them yelling and screaming at them. And I said, "Well, okay, Jen, I'll there's some organizations here I've been connected with a little bit peripherally." The Filipino organizations in Victoria and Vancouver, and I'll dig around. So I dug around, and I spoke to some people, some union activists, more or less, from the Filipino movement, protecting migrants, and I got her some websites and phone numbers, and she passed it on to these folks, and she said they're overjoyed because they're insulated. They just simply came over, even though these organizations were there ready for them, the trade union movement in Alberta, but they were insulated. They couldn't, they didn't have the language. They were simply just doing grunt work. And Jennifer said, "Oh, they're so happy with me that I got them this information. They got a hold of them. They were speaking their own language to people on the phone, finding out, what they can do and what their rights were. And I never did hear the end of it, but I'm sure it went well. It certainly went better.
Sure.
So her heart's in the right place. And anyways, carry on. I'm rambling.
No, you're doing great.
I warned you.
You're doing great, Kevin. I also know that you were pretty involved with the Fairy Creek protest. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Fairy Creek is just outside of Port Renfrew. I happen to own a piece of property in Port Renfrew, 8 acres of stumps. Back in, me and my late wife, Georgina, we bought 8 acres in Port Renfrew for $15,000 back in the day, before things went crazy. Now there's hundreds of thousands of dollars. But anyways, so I got this 8 acres, got a little cabin on it. right on the river, on a road right near the about 2 kilometers out of Port Renfrew, I guess. And actually, we're legally in Port Renfrew. Anyways, what's of note there is when I supported the Fairy Creek folks when when it first got going. I knew a lot of the activists. I'd been up to the Wet'suwet'en pipeline blockades as a mechanic. I helped fix the buses that got people up there and back again, and helped them build some buildings, and I called them defense structures around the camp there and in Wet'suwet'en. Anyway, so people already knew about me, and I knew about some of the basic same people some of the leadership anyways turned up in Fairy Creek. So and when they issued the court orders, they were arresting and throwing people, cops were arresting people and driving them to the couch and just throwing them out the door. And they'd have to somehow get back overland back to Fairy Creek. And then they had the exclusion zone that they set up. And it just happened that their exclusion zone, my property is 1,200 feet long, and I'm my house is at the southern end of it. But at the northern end of my property, it's just a few hundred yards away from the edge of the exclusion zone. Just when the judge set it up, it was in the middle of the south arm of the San Juan River, which is within a stone's throw of my property. So anyway, so my property was outside. The activists, if they got thrown out of the exclusion zone, they could stay on my property. So they'd camp on my property. They had their big meetings on my property, at my cabin on my deck. Leadership would all turn up, and they were safe. The cops couldn't do anything. The loggers and the cops were pissed off. The loggers actually I guess they were trying to be scary. These goons would come in their pickup trucks, and they'd park within sight of our deck, about 100 yards up the road, and they'd sit on the tailgate and they'd drink and throw their empties into the river. It's like a Red-Green show, and just trying to scare people, scare these young folks, but they're safe on my property. Nobody could do anything. They couldn't come on the property. They could sleep. The welders that made the sleeping dragons, the metal work that where they could lock themselves up and slow down, block the roads. The two welders, the young woman and guy, they lived at my place for months. And we set up a shop for them on my property, and they were welding these things up and taking them up to the camp. And I'm sure, and the cops would drive by. They'd actually stop driving by because it's a dead end road where I live. So the cops would simply, they followed these guys up to the turnoff off the Highway 14, and they just wait for them because they knew there was nothing they could do. And then when they drove back out, they just follow them again. And
have you ever been arrested?
No. And that's an important point. If I was arrested, they could use that to keep me from doing my overseas work.
How have you avoided arrest after all these years of activism?
I keep away from the front lines because to be honest, the most important work is the work I do overseas. That's the most important work. But I still do local work. But
why do you think the overseas is the most important work?
Because they're the ones suffering. They're the ones that are dying. They're the ones spending time in jail. I spent 3 years visiting a political prisoner in Bogota, and a female trade union leader, and she actually visited my home. We hosted all sorts of people from just like my mom and dad did. As a kid, there'd always be somebody sleeping on the living room floor. Not always, but it'd be often somebody sleeping on the living room floor. And at one point, I think a native family got burned out in the Esquimalt, and the whole family moved into our house. So we had three young kids, native kids in our house. I didn't know anything. I was just a little toddler. But again, eventually I realized, well, that mom and dad did that because these folks were oppressed and they had nowhere else to go. So mom and dad opened up their home to them, and they stayed with us and lived with us for a while, and until they got accommodated. Liliana Bando, Colombia. So she came and visited us. So she did a tour as a trade union leader from Colombia, and she visited me in Victoria. So we put them up. And my late wife, it was the last thing she did before she died of cancer, was she hosted Lily Annie and produced a wonderful meal. And she slept in her house. I took her out to Port Renfrew, and then Georgina died that spring, and just a few months later. And when Lily Annie went back to Colombia, the Colombian government said you were raising money for FARC, the guerrillas, and they threw her in jail. No evidence, no proof, but just they just threw her in jail. And her two kids were on their own with her grandmother, and I thought, well, if she's the relevant, the importance of things, if she's been thrown in jail in there, here I'm a rich gringo. I can simply go down and visit her. So because she was so good to Georgina, and Georgina's last act of activism was to help her. I went down and visited her in her prison there, which drove the Colombians nuts. They didn't know what the hell to do with it. Who is this white gringo that's dressed like a retired? I was a vocational instructor at that point. This well-dressed vocational instructor, and who is this guy that's going into this grotty, awful, downtown Bogota prison to visit Liliana Bando, and she was going to get many, many, many years in prison. But because I would like to think, because I visited her a number of times and stayed with her family and acted as a human shield for her family, because there were goons around watching them. I think she said she got out of prison early because of that. And actually they arrested her a second time, and I went down. It just happened. I was able to go down immediately. I was there within a couple of days. And I got into it was actually an old torture center back in the day, this awful concrete, just what you think of as a torture center, an awful concrete, blob military building. And somehow or another, they because I was white, the white passport gringo, they let me in. I sat down with Lily Annie with these goons all around us, and she got out within days. Again, it just the timing was perfect. I showed up looking like I just walked out of Comoson College as a professor, vocational instructor, and they didn't know what to do with me. So I guess for them, they said, "Get her out of here, little Annie, get her out of the prison. This is looking bad."
Sounds like
CBC is calling us.
It sounds like one of the lessons. I know we started this interview by talking about projecting forward and trying to have some teachable moments. And it sounds like one of the lessons, and correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe is the most important from your life is the importance of just being there, of just being present, placing your own body in these situations.
In Canada, it's irrelevant. I'm just one more activist. Even if I dress nice, it doesn't matter. But overseas, simply being there, exactly. Whether it's in Colombia or in Guatemala in '89, the car bomb outside, it was an eye opener, and it worked. I mean, they issued death threats against the 5 leaders, Rigoberto Menchú, Marta Torres, Frank LaRue, and Rolando, and the other professor or the other university guy. So they should hit them with death threats right off the bat. You have to be out of Guatemala and by Thursday, or you're all dead. And they sent them all flowers, for Mother's Day, saying, "Get out, or you and your parents are dead." And I of course already know where I'm going with this, but
Well, we were talking about the importance of being there and of bearing witness
yep,
as an activist who wants to make a change in the world.
yep, yeah. No, well, again, everybody that's listening to this has probably got a Canadian passport or could have a Canadian passport, and it counts for a lot overseas. I mean, eventually it didn't help Rachel Corrie. She was killed by the Israelis, and Tom Herndel, another ISM, International Solidarity Movement activist, who was executed by the Israelis. But the Israelis did that because the ISM was getting too effective.
Yeah.
They were, the passport was being used it was too effective, and they had to do something. So they just like I was saying, when we were in Bethlehem 2002, and I watched the soldier behind the machine gun on top of the armored personnel carrier. Well, we're all chanting and waving signs, and I watched him. Actually, got photographs of him on the phone, and somebody, and the Palestinians told us that's the first time they had actually shot an internationalist, and he was getting the approval from somebody way high up, saying, "Well, that's enough. We have to put these guys in their place, so you can shoot at them."
What do you think? I mean, what are some lessons that people should take away from this moment, and what are some things that you think are the most important for activists and internationalists to be doing in this moment, where it seems like there's just never-ending threats and capital, and the system of international oppression seems to be stronger than maybe ever before?
I can't think who said it. Was it Trotsky? We're in the belly of the beast here. And because we're in the belly of the beast, we can be very effective right here. If someone's not comfortable being shot at in Bethlehem or Colombia or whatever, well, you can be effective. Well, look what's happening right now. Can't think of her name, Kate. Palestinian activist, Canadian, whatever, Caucasian. She had the cop SWAT team sweep into her house in Vancouver just a couple of months ago and seize all her phones and her electronic equipment and threaten her with arrest. Well, you can really piss them off right here by just what you're doing here. Getting the word out. I mean, they're trying to shut down the internet now because of, or at least shut down the internet with the algorithms to not let people get news like yours, what you're producing here. And so they're getting scared. They don't know what to do to some degree. They being, the CSIS and the federal government and the Americans. And
But if I was an 18-year-old young activist coming to you saying, "Kevin, I want to be like you," what would your advice be?
Make the most of the system. Get educated. Learn a trade. Learn how to do podcasts. I took my mechanic skills, which just happens to be that's what I'm good at. All the tests in the world said, you need to be an aircraft mechanic, Kevin Neish. Well, I took that and I made really good use of it. Wherever I go, like I was saying, when I went to Gaza, besides standing in the field, I never did get shot at there. It was a peaceful moment between wars, but I looked around and I got my fixer, Palestinian fixer. So I want to talk to somebody from the fire department because I repaired fire trucks. I worked at Dockyard, of all things. I worked for the military, civilian mechanic. It wasn't my choice, but unemployment insurance sent me there to get a job, and I landed the job immediately because I was a very skilled mechanic. And so I fixed fire trucks at Dockyard for 12 years, one of my jobs. So I went to there and I told them, I can fix fire trucks, I can fix ambulances. And I sat down with the the civil defense leader, General Zahar. There's two General Zahars, one's military and one's civil defense. Anyway, so he listened to me. He says, "Well, okay, we'll put you in the repair shop down at the Gaza port." So I spent a lot of my 4 months showing up every day and they knew how to fix older vehicles. I watched some of these vehicles came in with routine repairs, things just break all the time regularly, and they'd have the thing ripped apart and put together in a matter of an hour, because they knew they'd worked with these things. They were so old and worn out that they knew exactly what to do. So I really didn't. A couple of times my technical skills helped them, but for the most part, it was I just handed them things. I was a flunky to a large degree, and but it I was using my skills. Anyways, yeah, just we've got this best education system in the world here. Well, make the best of it. Use it against them. I'm all in favor of using what the system has to offer against the system. Hee-haw. If they're going to offer you a opportunity to get very well educated in whatever trade or whatever courses, go for it, and then use it against them. Quick story, just a funny story. In junior high, senior high, whatever, one of my good friends was, he lived just a block up from me in South Oak Bay. Here, I'm from one of the richest places in Canada, which is another story how I ended up there. That was Mum's. I always wonder why did I get raised in this rich, neighborhood? These kids that were getting cars for graduation presents. They had pools. And I realized that my mom knew, because my dad didn't want to move there, but my mom knew that if you're going to get a good education, where you got to be? You got to be in a rich neighborhood. So they bought the $500 lot in deep, dark South Oak Bay from the municipality, built their own house, and that's why we were there. She didn't say this to my face, but I eventually figured it out. And I'm rambling again.
That's okay. We gotta wrap it up.
There we go. Good timing.
Any final thoughts? Any last words of encouragement for our listeners, for our customers, for people who want to make a difference in the world?
Like I said before, make yourself useful. Whatever. The movement doesn't need somebody that doesn't know their asshole from a hole in the ground. They need somebody
They need people who can do things.
Who can do things.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, anything. Whatever. Even if it's just sitting at home with a computer and helping out that way. And then I would say listen to the people overseas. Like I was saying, the ISM, International Solidarity Movement. It's Rachel Corrie, Tom Herndel, all these people, white gringos, so to speak. They get the top billing, but that organization is run by the Palestinians. And Rachel Corrie wasn't there on her own. She was there following orders from the Palestinians. And you find organizations like that. The Freedom Flotillas. I've been on 4 flotillas going to Gaza, and it's the grass. I'm just a flunky. I'm an engineer on the ship, and I just follow orders from people higher up who I trust. So you got to search out these organizations. With Sotan, same thing. The pipeline protest up north. You just show up. You got to trust them that they know what they're doing. And Fairy Creek, same thing. Bill Jones. Now he's a good friend of mine. He First Nations elder. So the Fairy Creek. It's 1,200 activists got arrested, but behind the scenes, it was people like Bill Jones. First Nations people who were I won't say calling the shots, but they were the ones teaching and leading. And you have to have your ears open and listen to these people and do what they say.
Well, Kevin Neish, thank you very much for joining us on Seeds of Revolution. I really appreciate it.
Oh, okay. Hopefully it helps out somehow or another.
I'm sure it does, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us your wisdom and your life stories.
Okay, well, lots of war stories. Bye-bye.
If Jesus Christ came back today like you threaten he will, which poor group of people do you think that he would kill? And who would Jesus choose to starve if you gave him the chance? And if there was a genocide, would he take a neutral stance? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would he say it's complicated and there's sinners on both sides? Or would he say that some people, they just deserve to die? If Jesus Christ rose from the dead and on a sidewalk slept, would you extend your hand to him or just watch where you stepped? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus hate the gay folk, the queer folk, or the trans? Would he suggest they end their lives according to God's plans? Would Jesus tell a homeless man to get a fucking job, or turn his back on the poor? Would Jesus be a snob? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus build a border wall? Would Jesus drive a tank? Would Jesus be a landlord? Would Jesus run a bank? Would Jesus Christ feel safe in his skin if he came to your town? And would you still believe in him if you found out he was brown? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Yeah, who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well,